Man, oh man, I've been excited to make this video because goddammit, I love talking about Dune on this channel. I made a lot of videos about Dune, specifically the movies. If you're somebody who's coming from like book 2, because I'm talking about books, I usually make a lot of videos on movies and TV shows, so go check those out. But I love Dune, and over the last couple months I've been reading through all of the Dune books based on my love for the movies. I remember I read the original Dune book 2 years ago after the first movie came out, and now I have finally read through the first 6 Frank Herbert books, and the only 6 Frank Herbert books that he wrote in this universe. Because if you didn't know, Frank Herbert wrote 6 Dune books. He was meant to write 7. There was going to be a 7th part that finished the whole series. He ended up passing away, and then his son and his co-writer ended up writing a bunch of Dune shit that I have not read, and I've heard they're not worth reading. So yeah. But today I will rank through all 6 books in the Frank Herbert Dune universe, and I will tell you which ones I loved, which ones I didn't love as much, and kind of tell you which ones I think are legendary and should get movie adaptations. So let's jump right into it. At dead last, number 6, my least favorite book and the hardest one for me to read personally was Heretics of Dune. Now, Heretics of Dune is a very interesting novel. This was the book that was supposed to start a brand new trilogy of Dune books. Of course, Frank Herbert's sort of plan was to have that first 3 books that's formed kind of like the Paul Atreides trilogy. Then you had God Emperor, which is kind of like that bridge book, and then Heretics was going to be the start of a brand new trilogy that we only ended up getting 2 books in. So that means Heretics had a very, very tall task of sort of resetting the universe and reintroducing readers into a new era of Dune. And because of that, it's the hardest book to read, because for 4 books you have been reading familiar characters, familiar locations, and familiar ideas that all sort of connect, and then you get into this book, and it's mainly following the Bene Gesserit sisterhood and a lot of the characters involved with that. And we jump about 1,500 years after, and by the way, spoiler alert for this whole video for a lot of this stuff, about 1,500 years after the death of God Emperor Leto Atreides II. Of course, the son of Paul Atreides, and his idea of the Golden Path, and now we're seeing kind of like the scattering of the universe and how everything has been set afterwards. And the Bene Gesserits are kind of like in conflict with this weird, evil Bene Gesserit group. There's like this weird girl that talks to sandworms and dances with sandworms on Arrakis, which is now just called Rakis, and there's like a weird conflict stirring with that. You have another Duncan Idaho clone who's sort of becoming the main character of this series at this point, and this one is just really, really weird, and I just could not get connected with it. Partially because I loved some of the previous books so much, and parts of what I loved about those books are no longer in this book. I just felt so disconnected, and I feel like a lot of the philosophical stuff in this one just kind of went over my head, and I just was not vibing with it. So that's why Heretics is last. It was by far the hardest book for me to read through. Did get through it, but not my favorite. Next up, for the same reasons that I don't exactly love Heretics, I like this one a bit more, but not much more, we have Chapter House Dune. Now, of course, this is the last book that Frank Herbert was able to write before his passing. It is the 6th and final Dune book in his series of Dune, and it's a book that continues off of Heretics of Dune. We have the Chapter House planet, which is now being converted in kind of like this new Arrakis type thing. You have Duncan Idaho back. You have a bunch of the characters from Heretics back. And this one moves a lot faster. It gets to what it's doing a lot faster. There's a lot more beats in this book. I think I find it interesting kind of how it concludes, sort of like on a cliffhanger that we never really saw resolved, I guess, because we don't get his 7th book. But I think Chapter House is a lot more interesting when it actually dives into the structures of the Bene Gesserits and a lot of the political conflicts that are going on within that group and their conflict with sort of that outside evil Bene Gesserit group. At the same time, though, just could not connect with a lot of the characters in this one. Just a lot of what was going on in the original books is just not found here, and it sort of feels almost like a different sort of series. It feels like not just like, it doesn't feel like books 5 and 6 of a franchise. It feels like books 1 and 2 of a new franchise or a new universe that kind of takes place within the Dune mythos. And because of that, I just didn't enjoy it that much. So yeah, these 2 books definitely in dead last. Chapter House Dune, number 5. Now we get to the good shit, okay? We get to the good Dune books. I call it the Paul Atreides 4, even though Paul's not really in all 4 of them, but these are the 4 books that deal with that Atreides storyline. It starts in the first Dune, it ends in God Emperor of Dune. This is what I consider to be Dune. And at number 4, and the worst of those 4 books, and I hate using the word worst because it's not bad at all, Dune Messiah. Dune Messiah, of course, the next book that is getting a movie adaptation in a couple years, which will probably end up being called Dune Part 3. Dune Messiah is essentially an epilogue to the first Dune book. At the end of the first Dune book, Paul Atreides becomes emperor of the known universe. He's ruling the Imperium. He controls Arrakis and all the spice, and he's kind of become this, not just the Lisan al-Jaib, not just Muad'Dib, but he's kind of become the Kwisatz Haderach that the Bene Gesserits had foretold. This male Bene Gesserit who could see into the future, see into the past, past, and he's kind of like a god. And we jump 10 years after the original Dune, and we kind of see the effects of what this godhood and this emperorhood have done to Paul. We see this universe that has been completely shattered by his rule. There was a gigantic jihad across the galaxy which killed trillions of people. And this book studies what that would do to a person. And Paul is in this spot in this book where he's kind of seen the future, and he's sort of seen this golden path of humanity, this pathway that humanity can actually succeed and be a better version of itself and not kind of like collapse within itself. And he sees this path, and he understands what he needs to become to see that through, and he understands the pain and the just terribleness that he would have to do to get that golden path to be. So we study what that would do to a man, and if Paul is the kind of man to deal with that responsibility, and that is the entire point of Dune Messiah. And because of that, it is a very slow book. Even though it's the shortest in the series, it feels like the longest, because not a lot's happening for a lot of this. There's a lot of scheming, there's a lot of talking, there's a lot of Paul dealing with his own shit, there's a lot of Alia, his sister in this book, who I think is the best character in this book, there's a lot of Chani doing stuff that I don't think she's going to do in the movie, because she's a very different character here. You get more of Princess Irulan, who ends up being a much more deeper character than you would expect after the first one. But yet again, this book doesn't really feel like a big epic like the first book, which obviously it wasn't supposed to. It was supposed to be kind of this epilogue-y thing to be like, well, here's the truth about Paul Atreides and the things that he now has become and will have to become if he continues. I really love the final couple chapters of this book, where it ends up. I really love the whole ending with the face stealer dude, and he's trying to kill Paul's kids, and there's a great sequence there that I cannot wait to see adapted into live action. Paul walking into the desert at the end and just kind of saying, fuck all this, and just leaving is great, and such an interesting way for his character to sort of conclude. We'll get into more of that in a second. But overall, Dune Messiah is a great read. It's nice that it's the shortest in the series, because the other ones are all fucking long as shit. This one is short, which is nice, but it's definitely the worst of, like, the core four. Here we go. I'm about to rustle some feathers. You ready for this one? At number 3 is the original Dune. Yes, the one that started it all, the most famous one, the one that we have gotten movie adaptations for. Dune is one of the greatest books ever written in the history of man. I just personally enjoyed the 2 other books a little bit more, but let me get into why Dune is so great. Of course, this is an epic story that introduces us into this universe of humanity that is so far into the future that they're able to convert space, they're either travel through space using this thing called spice, which is only found on this planet Arrakis. Now, you obviously have the conflict between the Atreides and the Harkonnens, as the Atreides are given the planet of Arrakis, which was the Harkonnens' planet, and they now control the spice, which kind of commands this incredible political plot between the Harkonnens and the Atreides, which is also connected to the Emperor, who's just being a dick and he wants to kill the Atreides. So the conflict of politics here is probably the most deep and most organized out of the entire series of books. This conflict between Harkonnen, Atreides, Corrino, the Sardaukar, the Fremen. There's so much going on in this book, more so than any of the other books, that it's almost hard to kind of consume all of it at the same time. There's so much information here. But it all works super, super well. This book has the best characters in it. Lady Jessica, Paul Atreides, you got Baron Harkonnen, who's terrifying and awesome, and different enough than what he is in the movies that when you read the book, you still kind of get a different version of that character. There's just so much going on here, especially early in the book. It's actually crazy to me, something I didn't know before reading this book, is that part 1, like Dune part 1, when I first saw that movie, I was like, this had to be like holding a lot back from the book. It had to be just like a little bit of the book, and part 2 is going to be a lot. After reading the book, bro, part 1 is like all of this, and like part 2 is like that. This book is mostly Dune Part 1, which is fucking crazy, because that movie's way more boring than Dune Part 2. Not to say it's boring, but it's definitely slower. But we focus on a lot of that early shit in this book, and I think it actually works a lot better here than in the films, because it's able to convey a lot of the information in a much slicker way than in the films, where in the film, it's just kind of rushing that information to you, and you're getting overloaded. But once you actually get to Paul in the desert, becoming a Fremen, training with the Fremen, riding sandworms, becoming the Paul Atreides that we know, becoming the Lisat al-Jaib, it is awesome. It is epic. It's actually not as epic as the movie at times. Like, you don't see a lot of what you see in the movie. There's a time jump here that kind of insinuates that Paul has become that and has done a lot of those things, but you don't see it exactly. But still, the build up to the big fight and the big confrontation with the Emperor is great. The ending of the book is great. I think the changes that the movie made were well done and well needed, but at the same time, the stuff that happens in this book is still great. The things that differentiate it from Denis films and make it the original masterpiece that it is are still masterful. It's a great book. If you've never read Dune, go read it, make up your own opinion. It's definitely the biggest of all of these, but I enjoy reading this one. It's crazy, it's big, and it is epic. I just think the next 2 books are a little better. And my number 2 is Children of Dune. What a book, my god. Why is this one not being adapted into a movie? Why are we just stopping at Dune Messiah? Because in my opinion, this is the conclusion if you want to do a trilogy. So Children of Dune takes place years after Paul Atreides, you know, the Muad'Dib, the Emperor of the known universe, disappears into the desert. His kids are now like 10 years old or like 9 years old, but they're not just kids, they are very, very smart kids. They have that same kind of Bene Gesserit ability, that Reverend Mother ability where they can see the future, see the past. They have all these crazy, their minds have been unlocked. So they are very, very smart. You have Alia, who has become the kind of like reigning emperor of the universe just until the kids come of age. And because of that, you have this weird conflict, this family conflict between Alia, who's sort of losing her mind in this book. She's kind of becoming the personalities that are kind of held in her mind. She's becoming Baron Harkonnen and all this other crazy shit that's going on. You have Lady Jessica back in this book, who's just a badass. You have Leto Atreides, who is a pain in the ass in this book. He's just this annoying kid that knows everything, and it's kind of fucking annoying at some points. You have his sister, who's a great character. You have House Corino that really comes back in this book in a way that I found to be extremely interesting and kind of mirror the arc of Paul Atreides. This book was a page-turner. I know I've read a lot online that people found this one to be boring. I did not at all. I could not stop turning the pages because I wanted to see how they were going to bring back Paul with the preacher character, where it was all going with Alia, where like Leto's journey was going in the desert. I found it all to be so fascinating, how all of these different chess parts in this book, they all were fascinating to me, and they were all kind of converging at the same time to where you get that third act, that final conclusion that ends up being this big moment that I felt like Dune Messiah might have been missing. This one has it, and it feels like an ending. It feels like the ending almost of a trilogy. It kind of felt like the end of Shogun, which, spoiler alert for Shogun, but the way that Shogun ends is there's a moment at the ending where, you know that Toranaga's gonna win. You know that his character is going to win. They never show you the battle, they never show you the war, but he explains, I'm gonna win because I've already played this chess game to perfection. There's no way I could lose, and here's what's gonna happen after I win. They tell you what's going to happen, so you don't have to see it. This book kind of has a similar thing, where Leto wins, he becomes the emperor, and he's like, listen, I'm following the golden path, I'm gonna be a god because I'm like now kind of like a sandworm, and that's it. Like, you really don't have to see what happens next. Although we do, but it just has kind of like that conclusion. I think the stuff between Leto and Paul in this book is so fucking great. I think Paul's conclusion is really tragic, kind of like this revelation that he's really not the main character of this series, that it's Leto, that he's not really the Kwisatz Haderach, it's fucking Leto. Like, that is, to me, very, very cool. That Leto was able to make that sacrifice that Paul couldn't. He's able to sacrifice himself and sacrifice his image and be this tyrannical ruler for thousands of years. That is just so fascinating to me, and it made for this book. This book ended up being the philosophical journey that I think Frank Herbert wanted it to be. For me, for a lot of other readers, Children of Dune is a masterpiece, and obviously for me, I'm ranking it number 2 ahead of the original book. I love it. I would love to see this get a movie after Dune Messiah. I would love to see Denis do it. I don't think it's going to happen, but my god, this would be the perfect trilogy ender. And last but not least, and I'm gonna be honest, it's not even close. Number 1 is God Emperor of Dune. What the fuck is this book, man? I didn't know what to expect in this book because I knew it was going to be a big time jump, a 3,000 year time jump from Children of Dune. So meaning all of the characters that we knew and love are dead except for Leto. Leto Atreides, who is now 3,000 plus years old, and he is a gigantic sandworm god. A guy who has lived 3,000 years and ruled for 3,000 years and has an iron fist grip on the galaxy, on the spice, and is just this all-knowing philosophical god. And most of this book, like the vast majority of it, almost every chapter, is just Leto kind of lecturing people on his intelligence and his feelings about the world and the golden path. And you know what? There is something so fascinating about this. This is the greatest piece of philosophical literature I think I have ever read in my entire life. Leto Atreides is such a fascinating character, and it would be really hard to make a story about a character like this because he's somebody who's lived for 3,000 years. He's been the most powerful man in thing, God, in the universe forever. So how do you make that interesting? Well, love, goddammit! You have him fall in fucking love, and that's how you make this interesting, because this book kind of shows, whereas Children of Dune showed Leto, a man, a boy, slowly becoming a god, and his mind kind of transcending into that, this is more so a god kind of transcending his mind back into being a man, and a study of what this kind of life would do to somebody who is in fact not a god. They're not a god emperor. They are a man at their core who has wants, needs, and just kind of wants that love. They want to escape the loneliness. And obviously there's a lot more to it than that, but that vibe of this book is just so incredible, and a lot of the philosophy that's written within just hooked me. This was the fastest I had read any of these books, including Dune Messiah, and I loved every second of God Emperor. Now, do I want to see this adapted to film? Abso-fucking-lutely not, because man, oh man, how would you even do this? I don't think you can. I don't think you could do God Emperor without it being absolutely ridiculous. I cannot see it done, and I don't want it seen. Like, I don't want it to be made at all. Like, let it be this book. Maybe do, like, an animated something, but God, this was so good. This, to me, is Dune. This feels like the cherry on top, right? If Dune, Dune Messiah, and Children of Dune are, like, the perfect trilogy, this is the nice little cherry on top of that trilogy to say, boom, this is the Dune story, this is the universe. Good luck. And I absolutely love it. That's why God Emperor is my favorite Dune book, and this series is fucking incredible, and you guys should read it. So let me know what you guys think. Where am I wrong? Where am I right? Let me know down below. Make sure to like this video, subscribe for more, turn on notifications to see everything when I post it, and I will see you guys in the next one.